Hi, today I'd like to talk to you about Eurobonds. You've probably been hearing a lot of talk in the news about Eurobonds and how they might represent a solution to the Eurozone debt crisis, but perhaps you don't know full well what they are. So to understand Eurobonds, we should probably start by talking about government bonds. Government bonds are, in essence, a way for governments to borrow money. A government who's interested in borrowing money will sell an investor a bond. Over a fixed period of time, the government will pay back the value of the bond, along with interest that's decided upon when the bond is first sold. Once everything is paid back, that chunk of debt is cancelled off. So, say I want to borrow 10 euros off you. I sell you a bond worth 10 euros and you give me a tenner for it at 5% interest. Over a period of, say, 10 months, so I don't have to do any complicated maths, I will pay you back 1 euro per month plus 5 cents, which represent the 5% interest. So by the end of the 10 months, you'll have 10 euros you gave me plus 50 cents profit in interest. That's simple enough, it's how regular loans work. The difference here is that once the bond's been issued, the investor can choose to hold on to it and collect the interest until it's been completely paid off, or he can choose to sell the bond on a financial market, which is called the bond market. The price of bonds will rise or fall depending on the interest outlook. Let's go back to the 10 euro bond I sold you. So you're now holding on to a bond that's got a fixed interest of 5% for the next 10 months. But now, due to market fluctuations, it looks like interest will be dropping over the next few months. Bonds issued now will probably be on 4 or even 3% interest, which is much lower compared to your 5%. So your 5% bond is looking juicy to anyone looking to buy bonds right now. And you think you could get a bigger profit by selling it right now, rather than holding on to it until it's been repaid. Once the bond's in the market, you can easily calculate its bond yield. The bond yield's there to tell the holder of the bond what the return will be on his initial investment. With your 10 euro bond, you're getting 5 cents a month in interest, which means you've got a 5% yield right there. But interest rates now are getting higher and higher, and your bond is losing value quickly when compared to bonds that are being issued at 9 or 10% interest. So you sell it for less than you bought it for. You sell it to your cousin for 7 euros. So now your cousin, who only paid 7 euros for this bond, is also getting the same 5 cents per month that you were getting before. He's getting a 7% return, hence a 7% yield. The bond yield and the way it mutates in the bond market are important because they help governments work out how much it will cost them to borrow more money. If my bonds have been selling for higher yields, then if I issue a new bond right now, I will be paying higher interest on it. So in our little example, now that the bond I sold you has a 7% yield, any bond I issue now will have at least 7% interest. So we all on the same page? Good, let's talk about Eurobonds then. Eurobonds are collective loans that would allow the European Union to borrow as a unit, rather than each country borrowing on its own. A lot of European states are having trouble borrowing from financial markets right now because interest is too high. If, for instance, the European Commission could borrow on behalf of all the Eurozone member states by issuing collective bonds, the costs of borrowing would be lowered for countries whose interest rates right now are too high, because they'd be balanced out by countries with better financial reputations. Italy, Spain and Portugal, for instance, would benefit a ton from getting to borrow with Germany. You've probably heard that Germany is the main opponent of Eurobonds, and I'll tell you why. Germans, usually represented in the person of their Chancellor Angela Merkel, have 3 main qualms with Eurobonds, and we'll go over all 3. 1. First of all, while interest rates have been rising for countries in financial distress, Germany's solid economy has benefited. Their costs of borrowing have been brought down. If they borrow collectively alongside less reliable countries, it might make their interest rates go up because the Eurozone might be seen as a riskier area for loans altogether. 2. We still don't know exactly how Eurobonds would work, but most models accept that countries would be held accountable for their neighbours' debts. Obviously, Germans aren't interested in being held accountable for Greek or Portuguese debt. 3. But what I think is the key matter to most Germans is that Eurobonds might make weaker European economies feel safe enough in borrowing and spending freely that they further weaken themselves and the rest of Europe, and make their debts even harder to sustain. This is sometimes called the lobster problem, which, as The Economist puts it, goes like this. Say a bunch of friends go out to dinner, and they know they'll split the bill in the end. So they're each looking at the menu and thinking, hell, if everyone else is ordering something expensive, might as well get the lobster. You see the problem here, everyone winds up spending tons more than they would if they were each paying for their own. Now, there are different models of Eurobonds which are more or less strict as to who is liable for what. There are types of Eurobonds where countries would still be responsible for most of their debt, but the Eurozone would help with the riskier loans. If you'd like to know more about different types of Eurobonds and how they would work, there's a link to a great article by the Business Insider in the blog, which you should definitely read if this is something you're interested in. So here's the big question. Could Eurobonds solve the European crisis? Don't hold your breath. According to most, the answer is probably not. even though Eurobonds would make it easier for less fortunate countries to borrow money. Most agree they won't solve the European crisis on their own. If they're applied soon enough, Eurobonds might help calm the market panic and help countries that aren't too far deep in debt, like Italy for instance. The thing is, the levels of debt contracted so far wouldn't be diminished at all, they would stay where they are, so countries like Greece or Portugal would still be in a lot of trouble. Everyone's still hazy on whether Eurobonds will happen or not. The Germans have been defending that in order for Eurobonds to be viable, the Union treaties would have to be amended. It's also becoming fairly clear that countries would have to give up a lot of sovereignty over their own spending and borrowing, which would be controlled out of Brussels. But really, that's the gist of it. I based a lot of this video on a great article by the BBC, which I've linked to in the blog. If you have questions, feel free to ask them in the comment, and I'll either look it up, or I'll ask someone who understands the whole thing better than me, and I'll get back to you. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Keep curious.